Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Douglas Sandoval, Managing Director of Camera on Campus, and I'm thrilled to have you here for today's webinar. We're here to talk about something that Camera has been raising the alarm about for years, Wikipedia's rampant anti-Israel bias. Back in 2008, nearly 20 years ago, Camera set out to do something simple, train volunteers to edit Wikipedia and correct anti-Israel bias. Nothing underhanded, just making sure our members knew how to use the platform and set the record straight when the facts were being distorted. But then, an anti-Israel publication called Electronic Intifada infiltrated our effort, took our private emails out of context, and launched a smear campaign. Wikipedia's administrators took the bait, coming down hard on Camera's volunteers while turning a blind eye to the Electronic Intifada and other pro-Palestinian groups that had been openly organizing, recruiting, and editing Wikipedia for years. Subsequent research exposed just how deep the problem ran. Groups like Wiki Project Palestine and Wikipedians for Palestine were systematically using Wikipedia to push a one-sided narrative. And here's the rub. When these groups were exposed, they simply deleted their records, and Wikipedia let them get away with it. Camera, on the other hand, was singled out and made an example of. This wasn't about enforcing Wikipedia's rules. It was about demonizing and silencing a pro-Israel voice. And our experience proves the larger point. Wikipedia is only as neutral as the people running it. And when it comes to Israel, that neutrality disappears fast. To dive deeper into this issue, we're incredibly fortunate to have the leading investigative journalist on this topic, Aaron Bandler of the Jewish Journal in Los Angeles. Over the past year, Aaron has taken a deep dive into Wikipedia, publishing a must-read series exposing how this massively influential platform skews its coverage of Israel. Aaron will speak for about 25 minutes, followed by time for Q&A. If you move your cursor at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a little Q&A icon. Click that, type in your questions, and we'll do our best to get to as many of them as possible. Even if we don't get to yours, we'll be sharing all of your comments and questions with Aaron. Aaron, thank you so much for joining us. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Doug, and thank you everyone for joining us today on this very important webinar. I've been investigating this subject for several years now, and I'm very excited to share with you all today the various things that I have learned about Wikipedia over the years. I'll be explaining how Wikipedia works, how it's become biased, as well as share some general editing tips for those that wish to edit. So for starters, why is Wikipedia important? Well, it's the world's go-to site for information. It is the 5th most visited website worldwide as of December of last year. It is also usually one of the first results to pop up in a Google search. And there's actually an entire Wikipedia article dedicated to the long-standing relationship between Google and Wikipedia. Studies have shown that students begin the research process for their coursework by looking at Wikipedia. It is true that students are not allowed to cite Wikipedia for the research papers, but they will still look at it for their research and will use the sources that Wikipedia provides. Studies have also shown that doctors and judges use Wikipedia to research their respective fields. So all I have to say is that we all use Wikipedia, so of course it needs to be taken seriously, because what happens at Wikipedia eventually permeates throughout the culture at large. So here are some examples of bias that we have seen on Wikipedia in the past year. The first is that there is an article that exists called Gaza Genocide. Now, the article text used to qualify it as allegations of genocide against Israel, but now it just says that it's according to the UN and Amnesty, Human Rights Watch, etc., Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. Some critiques I have heard about this article from various editors I have talked to is that the title comes across as taking sides in what is a highly contentious and emotional issue. The lead states that experts, the UN, NGOs believe Israel is committing genocide, but the lead only presents one sentence providing Israel's response to the allegations of genocide, and it's just in response to the ICJ case. It doesn't present Israel's response to the UN or to the Amnesty and Human Rights Watch reports. And the reason why I focus on the lead so much is because the majority of Wikipedia readers don't read beyond the lead, and Wikipedia editors all know this. Now, if you look at the lead here, it says various observers which includes the UN Special Rapporteur, has cited statements by senior Israeli officials that may indicate an intent to destroy Gaza's population, a necessary condition for the legal threshold of genocide to be met. The Special Rapporteur, of course, that's Francesca Albanese. She's been accused of anti-Semitism by 3 diplomats in the Biden administration. The French and German governments have condemned her when she claimed that the victims of October 7th were not targeted for their Judaism, but targeted because of Israel's oppression. She's also being investigated for allegedly taking a trip funded by pro-Hamas groups. So she's a very controversial figure. But the way the Wikipedia article frames her here, it gives her this kind of aura of credibility that she doesn't really deserve to have. The Wikipedia article on Zionism, that went viral during the fall when it was pointed out that that the article describes Zionism as the colonization of Palestine. And it also says that the Zionists want to create a Jewish state in Palestine with as much land, as many Jews, and as few Palestinian Arabs as possible. Now, Middle East historian Asaf Romarowski tells me that the Wikipedia article implies that Jews are Europeans, that they've colonized the land. Now, he explains that when the Zionists were talking about colonization, what they were really saying in Hebrew was that they were talking about resettling the homeland, not stealing it, as the opposition implies. As to the line that the Zionists wanted as many Jews and as few Arabs as possible, Asaf says that there are abundant diplomatic correspondence showing that they were looking for ways for coexistence. And the fact of the matter is that all of the Arabs that stayed in Israel after the 48 War became today's Arab Israelis, and they became naturalized citizens because of that earlier desire for coexistence. And what makes this line even worse is that there was recently a 1-year moratorium placed on this line. So for the next year, no one can discuss or try to edit or change that line in any way. Unless that moratorium gets overturned, that line is not going anywhere anytime soon. Now here we have the Wikipedia article for the Nakba. Nakba is Arabic for catastrophe. It is the Palestinian point of view as to the events of the 1948 war. And the Wikipedia article describes it as the ethnic cleansing of Palestinian Arabs. Now, Asaf Romarowski tells me that the use of ethnic cleansing here, it is the politicized terminology, not the academic terminology. And he goes on to explain how the Nakba narrative is basically Holocaust inversion. He also says that the academic consensus is that the cause of Palestinian refugees from the 48 war, it's about a third, and a third attributed to forced removals, leaving on their own volition, and being told to by the Arab leaders. And he also says that anyone who adopts the ethnic cleansing narrative here is an agitator taking things out of context. So how does Wikipedia work? It operates primarily through a process known as consensus. Now, here is a snippet from Wikipedia's page describing consensus. And you can see here that I have the shorthand included, and I include this for all the Wikipedia policies I talk about in this presentation, because when you look at Wikipedia, editors will constantly throw this alphabet soup of wiki policy shorthand, and it can be very confusing and overwhelming if you don't know what it means. But if you type it into Wikipedia search engine, it will pull up the page. You can follow along. So what it says here is that when an editor makes a change to an article and the change is not disputed, it is presumed to have consensus. But if other editors do dispute the change, then you have to work out your differences on what's known as the talk page. Every Wikipedia article has what's known as a talk page. You can see it on this tab right here that says talk. It is to the right of the article tab, and the article tab is where you can read the article itself. And on talk pages, you can see editors discuss what an article should or should not say. And so on the talk pages, editors are supposed to work out the differences among themselves collegially, but sometimes a formal discussion is needed where a closer, which is a Wikipedian in good standing, is needed to render a verdict on the discussion based on the numbers and the strength of the arguments presented as they pertain to site policy. Numerically speaking, consensus is a supermajority, usually at least 2/3, and if there's no consensus, then the status quo content remains. So the previous examples of bias that I shared, that is the status quo content. And so unless a supermajority of the Wikipedia community is in favor of changing that content, it's not going anywhere anytime soon. In the past year, we have seen the numbers skew as high as 3-1 in favor of anti-Israel editors. And so here's an example of what's known as an RFC. An RFC is short for request for comment. This is an example of the kind of formal discussion that I referenced in the previous slide, in which a closer is needed to render a verdict. Here, the discussion was about if Wikipedia should qualify the Gaza Health Ministry as the Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry every time its numbers were cited. And here, the consensus was against using the Hamas-run qualifier. And according to the closer here, the numbers were about 3-1. Now, in this RFC, which was about the ADL's reliability in Wikipedia, the numbers were, again, about 3-1 in favor of downgrading the ADL to being generally unreliable on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Now, closers are supposed to take the strength of the arguments into account. And here you can see that the closer did do that to a degree. And same here as well. But when you have numbers like 3-1, those will almost always win the day on Wikipedia. But the numbers have recently changed. So last month, Wikipedia's arbitration committee, which is their version of a Supreme Court, they recently topic banned 6 prominent anti-Israel editors and 2 prominent pro-Israel editors. It's too early to say what kind of effect this will have on the topic area, but some editors I've spoken with argue that it's too late, that the damage has already been done. So here are some of the most important Wikipedia policies to know. The first is in POV, neutral point of view. And this policy explains that Wikipedia aims to describe disputes, but not engage in them, to inform, not to influence. And explains that the Wikipedia says neutrality is fairly representing all significant viewpoints that have been published by reliable sources in proportion to the prominence of each viewpoint in those sources. Giving due weight and avoiding giving undue weight means articles should not give minority views or aspects as much of or as detailed a description as more widely held views or widely supported aspects. What that means is that a Wikipedia article on a topic should not necessarily be 50-50 in terms of showing both sides. If 50% of the academic literature says one thing and 40% says another, that's how it should be reflected on Wikipedia. And so various topic-based discussions, sometimes we'll talk about if something is considered due for inclusion, meaning that there's enough coverage in reliable sources to warrant inclusion into the article, or if it's undue, meaning there's not enough coverage in reliable sources, and thus it should receive scant mention in the article or perhaps be excluded altogether. Verifiability. What this means is that anyone reading Wikipedia has to be able to check that the information in the article comes from a reliable source. The job of Wikipedia editor is to summarize what reliable sources say. So every time they make an edit, it has to be backed up by a reliable source. If they misrepresent what a source says, that's a cardinal sin in Wikipedia. So that's what verifiability means. Wikipedia bans what's known as original research, which means that editors cannot insert their own personal analysis into an article. And a subset of that is known as synth, which states that if a reliable source says A and another says B, do not join A and B together to imply a conclusion C not mentioned by either source. That is considered improper editorial synthesis. That is original research. So again, Wikipedia editors can only summarize what reliable sources say. They cannot put their own opinions into an article. So if one reliable source says A, another source says B, do not combine them. Summarize A and summarize B. Notability. So when Wikipedia editors talk about if a subject is notable, what they mean is if that topic has received enough coverage in reliable sources to warrant its own standalone article. Now, if you write an article on Wikipedia and you find that it has been nominated for deletion, follow what's known as a 3 sources test. This is an informal test, but it is referenced a lot in these types of discussions. And basically what it says is that if you can point to 3 quality sources in your article that provides thorough coverage of the topic at hand, then you'll be on solid ground. It does not guarantee that your article won't be deleted, but you will be on firmer ground from an argument standpoint. So what does Wikipedia consider to be a reliable source? Wikipedia defines a reliable source as independent published sources with a reputation for fact-checking and accuracy. And one of the ways they measure this is through what's known as UBO, or used by others. So basically, if, say, the New York Times or Washington Post is citing a source for facts, then that is a point in favor of the source's reliability on Wikipedia. But if the New York Times or Washington Post is accusing a source of promulgating misinformation, that is a point against the source's reliability on Wikipedia. So basically, used by others is how other reliable sources view a source. That goes to its credibility on Wikipedia. And also, Wikipedia allows for biased sources. So if you're trying to argue on Wikipedia that a source shouldn't be used because it's biased, that won't work. You have to show that the source has a proven track record of publishing misinformation. So here's some examples of where sources stand on Wikipedia. This is taken from what's known as the perennial sources list, or the RSP list. If you type that RSP shorthand onto the Wikipedia search engine, you can pull up this list and follow along. In the generally reliable category, you have legacy news outlets like the New York Times, CNN, BBC, Washington Post, The Guardian. You also have staunchly partisan sources like Al Jazeera, The Nation, Mother Jones, MSNBC, Amnesty International. You also have some Israeli sources like Times of Israel and Jerusalem Post, Haaretz. Marginally reliable, this means that the source maybe be okay to use depending on the context. So here you have sources like Salon, National Review, Washington Examiner, Huffington Post when it comes to politics, Mondoweiss, that's a rather anti-Israel news site, and Jacobin. Jacobin used to be considered generally reliable for many years on Wikipedia. It was recently downgraded to marginally reliable. Generally unreliable, so that means that a source should normally not be used on Wikipedia. Here you have sources like New York Post, Washington Free Beacon, Fox News for politics from November 2020 onwards, Daily Wire and GeoMonitor, reference ADL already. Then you have a couple anti-Israel sites here like Electronic Intifada and Counterpunch. Deprecated. So if a source is deprecated, that means it's a general prohibition on the source. And so these sources in this category include Daily Mail, Daily Caller, Epoch Times, Newsmax. You also have sources like Al Mayadeen, which is a Hezbollah affiliated network, and Press TV, which is an Iranian state network. And so anti-Israel editors, they will justify their edits by saying that they're just following the sources. They're just following the site policies, and therefore they're being neutral. So for example, take the use of ethnic cleansing in a Nakba article. It's used in Wikivoice, which is another way of saying a neutral voice on Wikipedia. Here the editors argue that it would be giving undue weight to a French point of view to not have ethnic cleansing in Wikivoice here. And later talking discussions, they said that dozens of academics have called it ethnic cleansing, and therefore Wikipedia should too. And in order to argue against it, you need to show that dozens of academics disagree with this. But NPOV is not a math problem. So my understanding, based on what I've been told by various editors, is that you're supposed to do a comprehensive source survey. And then you start to look for the most common things and the least common things among the sources, and then you start grouping them into clusters. But if you only do it for one cluster, then you're doing it wrong. In other words, what happened here is the anti-Israel editors, they selectively chose academic sources that fit their point of view, and then they said, hey, look at all these sources that call it ethnic cleansing. Therefore, we should too. But also quality of scholarship is a factor. And I have heard that just the fact that significant notable scholars like Benny Morris and Yoav Gelber have disputed the ethnic cleansing narrative here is enough to argue that it shouldn't be used in Wikivoice in this article. Another example is that they kept the October 7th massacre out of a Wikipedia article called List of Islamist Terror Attacks. And the reason why they did this is because they argued that it would be original research to include it. As they argued that it's not that Hamas's motivations were not Islamist, they were nationalistic. And some editors even argued that the whole thing shouldn't be considered a terror attack. And those in favor of inclusion argued that sources consider Hamas to be an Islamist group, and sources also consider October 7th to be a terror attack. Therefore, October 7th is an Islamist terror attack. It is therefore not original research. One editor also told me that there is a Wikipedia article that exists called Islamism in the Gaza Strip, and that article primarily talks about Hamas. Therefore, that is more evidence that it's not original research to include it here. But again, these things come down to numbers, and the numbers here were against inclusion. Now, there have also been some reports that anti-Israel editors have engaged in coordination. In October, there was a viral piece in Pirate Wires highlighting how there are at least 40 pro-Hamas editors on Wikipedia. And this piece provides statistics showing how these editors would obsessively edit Israel-Palestine articles, that there was a high amount of overlap between these editors in terms of the articles they edited and so forth, which would seem to imply coordination. The article also highlights the existence of a Discord server called Tech for Palestine, which had a channel called Wikipedia Collaboration, where people were coordinating on how to insert the Palestinian point of view into various articles on Wikipedia. Last month, a French journalist also exposed, well, actually, she infiltrated an anti-Israel club that was training Wikipedia editors on how to edit the French Wikipedia and how to insert the Palestinian narrative into those articles. And apparently the person running that club is an activist with the Urgence Palestine Collective. Now, that person claims that the collective was not in any way involved in this and that it's all, complies with Wikipedia policy and so forth. Now, I have seen evidence suggesting that this person was also involved in the Tech for Palestine Wikipedia channel. And it's so important because this kind of offsite coordination is very much against Wikipedia policy. But the only reason why we know about the existence of this Discord server is because it was publicly available for months. How many more of these are out there that we don't know about? So at this point in the presentation, you're all riled up and you're like, man, this all this bias Wikipedia really grinds my gears, and now I want to edit and fix it. Not so fast. Wikipedia has a very arcane and complex bureaucracy. If you're not careful, you'll be sanctioned off the site very quickly. Now, I just want to clarify here. I don't actually edit Wikipedia. I just cover it. But I've been investigating this topic enough over the years to know how exactly it all works. So the first thing to know is that there is a rule for Israel-Palestine articles called the 3500 rule. What this means is that in order to even begin editing those articles, you need to have been an editor for at least 30 days and have made at least 500 edits. Articles under this category are known as ECP, or Senate Confirmed Protection, and you know that if an article falls under this category because you can see this symbol here, a blue lock with an E on it. And if you edit any articles under this restriction before you reach the necessary threshold, you can get sanctions for that. I know it's a high bar, but you don't want to game it, meaning don't take shortcuts. The silver lining here is that this gives you the opportunity to learn the basics of Wikipedia in non-controversial topic areas. The fact is that Israel-Palestine has been a fraud topic area on Wikipedia for many years. So it's actually, if you want to edit there, it's very important to get the basics down first before doing so. And so on Wikipedia, here's some editing basics. Wikipedia encourages its editors to use what's known as an edit summary every time an edit is made. And so even like if you're fixing a copy edit, I should say, if you just make a copy edit to an article, write your edit summary here that you're making a copy edit, or you're fixing a typo. And the reason why you want to do this is because if you just make a bunch of edits without explanation, other editors will start to question your motives. Now, when you're into disagreements on Wikipedia, and you want to take your disputes to what's known as the talk page. You have to show that you can work and collaborate with others and work through disagreements collegially. And so you also put articles on what's known as your watch list. So to do that, you log into your account and you press on this star on the top of the Wikipedia article. And when you do that, you'll then see every subsequent change that is made to the article. You can see what's been added, what's been taken out. You'll also notice that there are editors who regularly edit different topic areas and articles. Every editor's contributions are public, so bookmark them. So between your bookmarks and your watch list, that will give you an idea as to what happened on Wikipedia in a given day. Now, you are able to start editing Israel-related articles. Don't be what's known as an SPA, or a single-purpose account. So if right when you hit 500 edits, you immediately start editing Israel-related articles, and you start editing with a point of view, that's how you become labeled as an SPA. That is not appropriate for Wikipedia. Wikipedia is supposed to be the sum of all human knowledge. So we all have our own interests, our hobbies, our jobs that we have unique knowledge about. So spread your knowledge around. If you also go into Wikipedia with the mindset of, I find this anti-Israel bias to be egregious, and by God, I will fix it by any means necessary, that is what's known as writing great wrongs behavior. That is also not appropriate for Wikipedia. A good editor seeks to genuinely improve the encyclopedia, not carry out an agenda. So the appropriate mindset for an editor on Wikipedia should be, like, what knowledge do I have to share that can make Wikipedia better? How can I best uphold the site's principles? When you make your edits, you want to do so incrementally, and you want to try and seek consensus and compromise. Now, Israel-Palestine articles fall under the umbrella of what's known as discretionary sanctions on Wikipedia. And what that means is that any admin that is not involved in the dispute at hand can unilaterally sanction another editor for a selected time that deems to be appropriate. Most of the time, though, admins will wait for editors to report it to various venues before taking action. Wikipedia also has various policies governing civility. One is NPA, no personal attacks. There are editors who will try to bait you with making a personal attack, and then they'll report you. Excessive kindness wins the day. I know that's hard to do when you're fighting on the internet about a very controversial topic, but you just have to be excessively kind on Wikipedia. You just have to be. You're also supposed to assume good faith when editing. So if you're in a disagreement with someone, don't assume that the other person has nefarious intentions. you're supposed to assume that it's just an honest, old-fashioned disagreement. And battleground editing, which is openly having an us versus them mentality on Wikipedia, that too can get you sanctioned. Wikipedia also frowns upon what's known as edit warning. Edit warning is when you keep reinstating an edit over and over again, even though it keeps getting undone. One policy that to crack down on this is called the 1RR rule, meaning that editors are allowed one revert, which is undoing an edit in part or in whole, per article in the span of 24 hours in the Israel-Palestine topic area. But even if you don't violate 1RR, you could still be sanctioned if you continually attempt to reinstate your edit and your edit keeps getting reverted. The point here is to foster discussion. Discussion. That's how things get done on Wikipedia, is through discussion. Now, some other things that can get you sanctioned, stalking. So, as I've said in this presentation, Wikipedia is in large part a numbers game. So if one person is using multiple accounts to sway consensus, that is a one-way ticket to getting site banned from Wikipedia. And there are veteran editors who are very good about sniffing socks out. Canvassing. So canvassing is any sort of like offsite recruitment, coordination, anything that's seen as like vote stacking or campaigning to manipulate consensus in a certain way. Telling people what to edit, that's all canvassing. So when I talked about in my earlier slide, I talked about the coordination among anti-Israel editors. That is canvassing. This is what Camera was accused of in 2008, and Doug mentioned at the end of the webinar that Camera feels like their actions in 2008 were misrepresented. Now, COI, conflict of interest editing. So if you have an off-wiki dispute with someone and you try to insert negative material about that person into the Wikipedia page, that's considered having a conflict of interest. That can get you sanctioned on Wikipedia. If you are being paid to edit on behalf of an individual or an organization and you don't disclose it on Wikipedia, that too can get you sanctioned. Now, if you want to write an article on Wikipedia, start by typing in an article title into the Wikipedia search engine. If the article doesn't exist, click on Create Article and start typing away. Now, if you're a new editor, the article will then be reviewed by someone with reviewing privileges, and if approved, it will go live. As you gain more experience, you can write an article from scratch, and you can make it go live yourself. Sometimes articles can be moved back to draft space if others find it to be problematic, and of course, it can be nominated for deletion. So, my concluding thoughts here: we need to all be thinking of Wikipedia differently. So, we need to stop thinking of Wikipedia as just this site that no one takes seriously. Because as I said at the beginning of this presentation, everyone uses it. Everyone uses Wikipedia. So we have to take it seriously. And we need to make it a topic conversation. For the past few years, we have seen Facebook, TikTok, Twitter, become part of the national discourse. Wikipedia has somehow evaded this for years. It's only in the past year that we've seen some momentum for this, but there needs to be more. The good news is that consensus can change on Wikipedia. Nothing is set in stone forever, technically, on Wikipedia. But Wikipedia can only work when there are enough editors on the site who are committed to upholding the site's principles. And with that, I conclude my presentation. You can reach me at my email, aaronb@jewishjournal.com. My handle on Instagram is @BannersBanter. There's a link to my author page. And on the Jewish Journal's homepage, we have a section called WikiWatch, where you can see all of my various articles on the matter in a rotating carousel. And I'm happy to answer any questions you all may have on the subject.
Aaron, thank you for that very informative but also troubling account of what's happening on this corrupted encyclopedia. Let's dive right into the questions. We have a lot here, but let me first ask you, what initially drew you to investigate Wikipedia's bias against Israel, and how have others responded to your reporting, including Wikipedia itself?
So we were first tipped off to this at the Jewish Journal several years ago. And it was one of those things that it was just like the more I looked into it, the more I just realized that there was just so much. I mean, Wikipedia article content alone could be worth several Jewish Journal articles. But then you have the policies, the talk pages, the various controversies on Wikipedia over the years. It's just so much. And it took us a while to kind of figure out like what exactly we were going to do with it. And the past year, we were finally able to start publishing some articles about this, and there's more to come, so stay tuned. As far as kind of response I've gotten, I'd say overall it's positive. I think a lot of people have described it as eye-opening, and they're glad that I'm on this subject. And now Wikipedia editors, they always know when an article is published at Wikipedia, and so my stuff's been shared, and there have been some snarky comments made. Whatever. I don't concern myself too much with that. Um, but my Wikipedia editor sources I talked to, I've all heard good things from them about my work, which is good because that means I got the, I mean, it's got the details right. I even had a couple reach out to me after my article was published because they were impressed with my work. So overall, I'd say that the response has been positive, and that's good because that shows that there's interest in this topic. And just to be clear, I'm not the only one who has written about this subject, but there's not too many of us, and there needs to be more.
Definitely. I agree. John Stuart Mill warned of the tyranny of the majority, and that seems relevant to what you've been saying. Wikipedia's consensus-driven model appears to disadvantage the world's Jewish minority, suppressing its perspectives in a way that feels fundamentally liberal. Are there other minority groups experiencing a similar marginalization under Wikipedia's flawed consensus system?
Yes, so I have heard that in regards to the Berbers, so the Berbers, I believe they are an indigenous people to North Africa. They have been trying to correct information about them in various articles about the Berbers, but they've been stymied by Arab nationalist editors. That's not too different from what Jewish editors have experienced on Wikipedia. I'm also somewhat familiar with how there are some in the American community who have criticized what Wikipedia says about them. I don't know too much about it, other than that the criticism exists. I think the main thing is that there's something on Wikipedia known as the gender gap. And what that refers to is how 10%, only 10% of Wikipedia editors are women. And so, in fact, actually, there was a study in the Critic, which is a UK publication, finding that the average Wikipedia editor is some dude who works a desk job and reads the Guardian's digital format. So that really tells you a lot about their editor base. And so I would say the main other example of the marginalization you mentioned in your question would probably be the gender gap.
No, that's interesting. And as someone that, avid user of technology and particularly even the use of, artificial intelligence is a personal interest of mine. It's interesting how like Wikipedia is used often as a source to train these models and also
Yep.
like, even Google search these days, you type in a query in the Google search and Google's Gemini AI will actually generate a response from sources, including Wikipedia. So it certainly goes far beyond even the website, considering that the bias is also influencing. It's also being the biased material is being used as a source in other platforms, and particularly in cutting edge technology like artificial intelligence. So it certainly, this issue is quite goes further than I think one would even imagine. Now, you also write in your articles your articles on the topic, you've written that how sources are viewed on Wikipedia ultimately comes down to what's known as consensus. Consensus is a combination of the number of editors who weigh in on a discussion and the strength of their arguments as it pertains to site policy. What criteria defines a strong argument? Who determines the strength of an argument? Or is strength also ultimately defined by consensus? I feel like that's kind of a big question in hearing your presentation. Certainly
Sure.
one that probably in the mind of a lot of the audience, and also certainly on mine.
So second, the argument is totally subjective. As I said in the presentation, you have these formal discussions. They're primarily known as RFCs, where you have a closer rendering a verdict on the discussion based on the numbers and site policy arguments. So it all comes down to what closure you get, and if the closer finds the argument to be compelling or not. And the closer also has to weigh in the numbers too. So I would say, generally speaking, from what I understand, the majority view will usually win in these types of discussions. Sometimes, but not often, the minority view will win in these discussions. But it's usually only if the majority view has an argument that's totally devoid of Wikipedia policy. That's known as "I just don't like it." Um, so, so basically, to answer your question, it depends on what closer you get.
Hmm. No, I guess that's what happens when you have this like crowdsourced platform, right? I mean, really, it's sort of the responses can vary depending on the many variables. But of course, I think your articles, and for anyone watching this, of course, for everyone watching this, I certainly recommend that you look at Aaron's articles, he really goes deep into the ins and outs of, and actually you cite several cases where, you cite some of these discussions and conversations. I think it's fascinating and important to kind of get into the ins and outs. Something that oftentimes, I mean, like for instance, how many times have I looked at the talk page on a Wikipedia article? Probably not often. Most people like myself probably just look at the refined product, right? And uh, so continuing on with our discussion, can you talk a little bit more about Wikipedia's reliable sources slash perennial sources list? What is the best way to understand the difference between generally unreliable and deprecated sources? And what are the problems with this list? Who's made the list? Who hasn't? And does it focus too much on? Does it bring too much attention on? Does it focus too much on entire sources rather than the truth of a claim, whatever its origin?
So the list was first made by one editor. It was never actually formally adopted by the community, but I think the Wikipedia community generally views it as an official guideline of sorts. So generally unreliable and deprecated. So the first thing to understand that generally unreliable, a source under that category might maybe be okay to use for basic factual claims. A deprecated source, if you try to cite it on Wikipedia, you'll get like a warning pop-up. Now, as far as the difference from a quality standpoint, one editor explained to me thusly, which is that a generally unreliable source is a source that would quote a climate skeptic. So meaning like why would a quality source be by giving this quack a platform? A deprecated source would fabricate the quote, meaning that a deprecated source is presumed to make stuff up. And so the list itself, it's interesting because some editors I've spoken to about the list say that it's a negative for Wikipedia because it's turned the discussion from is this source reliable for this specific claim to can I get this source I don't like banned from Wikipedia? And so that's why there are some who believe lists should be done away with altogether, and instead every use of a source should be on a case-by-case basis. Whereas others I talk to say, well, but if we did that, then that leads to more fighting in Wikipedia, and we have to worry about like truly bad sources getting in there, like Press TV or what have you. So I don't know what the right answer is, but it's something that the Wikipedia community I think needs to discuss.
Definitely, and actually building off of that, or vamping off that question, in one of your articles, Wikipedia's fundamental sourcing problem, you write, legacy media outlets have promulgated false stories, but Wikipedia editors tend to hand wave such errors away. Can you expand on that?
Sure. So in the article, I bring up the example of the Washington Post. How the Washington Post, they were sued for defamation when they published an article about the Covington kids, claiming that the Covington kids had mocked Native American man at the pro-life rally. That ended up not being true, and there was a settlement over that lawsuit. Washington Post had also published a story about how the Russians were giving bounties to the Taliban to kill American soldiers, and that also ended up not being true. It also reported on Trump's "Find the Frog" quote that ended up not being true. And so when this was put out Wikipedia, editors were like, "Oh, well, generally reliable doesn't mean always reliable." Washington Post still has a good reputation for fact checking and accuracy. Good sources make corrections; they admit their mistakes. We don't see that same kind of leeway like with Fox News, for instance. There have been efforts to downgrade Fox and Wikipedia for years, and they finally got what they wanted when the Dominion settlement happened. And now, whatever you may think of Fox News, the fact is that their coverage on Israel Palestine is a lot more fair and balanced than legacy media outlets. The legacy media outlets are. But I think the best example of the hand waving is actually with Al Jazeera, because a good example of this, and I mentioned this in my piece, is that Al Jazeera, about a year ago, they published a video interview with some woman claiming that IDF soldiers have been raping Palestinians in Al Shifa Hospital. This ended up being false, and Al Jazeera took it down quietly. But when this was put on Wikipedia, a bunch of editors were like, yeah, well, there was an allegation made. They reported on it. They never said it was true. Never mind the fact that like a truly reputable news outlet wouldn't publish a claim like that without trying to seek corroboration first. But this is what happens every time you question Al Jazeera's reliability on Wikipedia. I mean, if you try to bring up that they're funded by the Qatari regime, they'll just say, yeah, well, the BBC is funded by the British government. That's state-funded media. We use that too. Difference, of course, that Qatar funds Islamist terror groups and has harbored Hamas leaders. But the point is that there's always an excuse in Wikipedia. There's always an excuse. And with Al Jazeera, they'll also say, like, again, generally reliable, that doesn't mean always reliable. They're still widely cited in media and academia. There's always an excuse. And the fact is that as long as the numbers are there to keep it at that general reliable rating, it's not going to change.
Well, I think that leads us to the million-dollar question, right? Why do we see pro-Israel sources face skepticism and outright rejection? While sources critical of Israel are deemed reliable, right? I mean, you're talking about how in this case, Al Jazeera just seems to, they seem to be resistant of, they seem to continue to be treated as a reliable source, despite the fact that clearly there are many examples of them being unreliable. So why is that the case?
I think it just goes to show how the problems when these things are dictated by the whims of the mob. And I think, generally speaking, anti-Israel editors are a lot more aggressive about trying to get sources they don't like banned than the pro-Israel side is. And a great example of this is the ADL. So if you think about it, like the ADL has long been a respected organization. There is no valid argument from Wikipedian perspective to try and downgrade it because it's widely cited by quality media and academia sources. But the anti-Israel editors, they all rallied behind this argument that the ADL has wrongly conflated criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism, and they were able to whip up enough support for that. And one of the ways they did this was that they were citing sources like The Nation and The Guardian. Obviously those are very partisan sources, and so but because they all united around this argument, they were able to drum up enough support to get it downgraded. As I said in the presentation, the numbers were about 3-1 in favor of that. And what's particularly crazy, looking at that discussion almost a year later, is that discussion was overrun by editors who have since been banned. So what does that tell you about Wikipedia's system?
Wow. No, that leads to another important point is that we also have NGOs that are commonly sourced. I know, in my role at Camera on Campus, we have students that will often use look at the source list on Wikipedia's articles for, you could say, a place to start research, right? Let's see what the most common sources are for, say, a question about the Arab-Israeli, the war of 1948, for instance. And NGOs are just overwhelmingly present on so many articles on that topic, as well as many others. Like, what makes them uniquely influential in shaping narratives on Wikipedia? And, how do their biases affect the accuracy of articles on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and beyond?
So what's interesting is that advocacy sources are supposed to have less weight in Wikipedia than, say, scholarly sources and journalistic sources. The problem is that we have NGOs like Amnesty, Human Rights Watch, B'Tselem, is that editors will say, look, they're widely cited in like the media and academia, therefore we should cite them too. And so they'll cite like these reports from Amnesty and B'Tselem directly. And as I said in my presentation, editors can only summarize what reliable sources say. So yeah, I mean, we know, anyone in this space knows that these NGOs are political organizations with access to ground against Israel. So of course, if you're citing their reports directly, that is going to create bias to an article. And they're treated with such authority to Wikipedia. I mean, in my presentation, I pointed out the Gaza genocide article. In the very beginning, it says, according to Amnesty and Human Rights Watch, Israel's committed genocide, as if that's some sort of searing indictment, when it's really just, politics at play. But the way that's worded, it gives it an aura of credibility. And so I think that's how we see this how we see the NGOs kind of feed into the bias that we see on Wikipedia.
Interesting. Yeah. And I see a question here from the audience about NGO Monitor. And that NGO Monitor was dismissed as unreliable due to allegations of bias and misinformation. But yet, if my memory serves me well, Euromed Monitor, which has questionable ties to Hamas, is used often with attribution. Why do you think Wikipedia editors have been so resistant to applying the same scrutiny across the board?
Well, it gets back to my earlier response about how these things are dictated by the whims of the mob. the anti-Israel editors are more aggressive about trying to ban sources they don't like. So with NGO Monitor, someone opened an RFC, in those one discussions, and they had like evidence at the ready, which they claim show that NGO Monitor had spread misinformation. They had, they had sources ready, claiming that, and so they're able to win over other editors to their side. Editors may not necessarily even be familiar with the conflict. They just see that and go, oh, okay, like, yeah, this looks unreliable. Let's downgrade it. With Euromed, there hasn't been an RFC, an official RFC filed, but there has been some discussion. And when those questionable ties to Hamas were brought up, they were just dismissed. And editors were like, oh, well, I mean, that's not evidence there's no, you haven't presented evidence that they spread misinformation. They seem to be held in the highest seat by the UN. And
Yeah,
that's basically how those discussions usually go.
yeah, that's frustrating. I mean, have there been any successful attempts to challenge the status of sources, like say like MondoWise, for instance, or to improve at the very least, improve the reliability ratings of sources like Camera or Jewish Virtual Library, or even like you brought up a couple of questions ago, the ADL. What strategies have worked and what have failed?
So I would say that usually once these RFCs happen, like it's very hard to overturn them because again, it's come down to numbers, and so like there has to be a supermajority, usually 2/3, trying to overturn it. That just doesn't happen, especially right after an RFC occurs.
Hmm.
Usually, you have to show that that there's been a change in terms of how a source is perceived. Um, and that's just hard to do. I mean, ADL, maybe. Jewish Virtual Library, I think it has to sort of like improve its own standing among reliable sources first before it can be considered reliable in Wikipedia. Mondo-wise, so um, there was an interesting piece in Fathom Journal in July written by John Ware, who is a longtime journalist, and he describes the phenomenon of the alt media, how the alt media has tried to question Israel's claims that there was widespread rapes by Hamas on October 7th, and he lists Mondoweiss as being one of those, as being part of the alt media. That should tell you a lot about Mondoweiss and where, and what kind of news site they are.
Yeah.
In January, there was an RFC held on Mondoweiss, and I wrote about this in one of my articles. But basically, how the RFC went was it was opened by an editor, and the editor who's opened the RFC said that the editor who opened the RFC claimed that Mondoweiss had published pieces that glorified October 7th and had downplayed evidence of Hamas rapes that day. Therefore, Wikipedia should downgrade it. But then other editors were like, "Oh, but these are just examples of bias. We allow for biased sources. They still publish experts that should be cited on Wikipedia." And then later in the discussion, some editors and also editors defending Mondoweiss were like, "Well, they're not downplaying the broader claim of Hamas rapes. They're just questioning specific reported instances." And
Oh,
later in the discussion, it was brought up that it was argued that Mondoweiss blurs the distinction between news and opinion. An example cited was that Mondoweiss has an article titled like Israel is now full dictatorship or something. And that would be an absurd claim for even an opinion column. This was a news article. But then other
wow.
editors were like, yeah, well, but news outlets blur news and opinion all the time. So again, there's always an excuse, and it always comes down to numbers.
Well, that something that I guess what comes to the mind. I mean, I imagine of much of the audience here is okay. Well, clearly, it. Do you? Is there? I mean, I would think, right? There has to be some kind of outside influence, right? Or either by media organizations, advocacy groups, maybe hostile state actors. I mean, if there's time and time again, we're seeing just the cards stacked against Israel and just everything kind of favoring and all these exceptions being made to the anti-Israel sources. What do you think? Where do you think this is coming from? And are there other examples you can think of beyond the example of Mondo, this RFC on Mondoweiss, where you've seen this manifest?
So I think everyone kind of knows that there's some sort of outside influence on Wikipedia. I mean, like Larry Sanger, who's a co-founder of Wikipedia, has talked about this, and he says that it's just common sense because that's how the world works. Um, but to what extent exactly, we don't know. And now there was an op-ed in townhall.com last year that how like the Iranian regime has, infiltrated Wikipedia and tried to, make edits there, whitewashing the regime's atrocities. And the column also talked about how there's been documented instances of the CCP regime in China, um, making such edits to Wikipedia as well as the regimes in Russia and Saudi Arabia. And look, and Wikipedia's editors I talked to, they all acknowledge that these kinds of things likely go on. But to what extent, we really don't know because so many people are anonymous on Wikipedia.
Yes, no, for sure. And do you think that, like, with respect to other conflicts, like say like the historic tensions between India and Pakistan, do you think do they also face similar issues and controversies in Wikipedia's coverage, or is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict uniquely affected within Wikipedia's ecosystem?
Yes. So that's a question. Yes, like every major conflict has had various controversies in Wikipedia. It's India, Pakistan, China, Taiwan, Sudan, South Sudan, Armenia, Azerbaijan. They've all been subjected to various controversies on Wikipedia over the years. Um, American politics, of course, is also a very controversial topic area on Wikipedia, of course. But I don't think any of these have had the same sort of like high intentions that the Israel-Palestine conflict has had on Wikipedia.
Fascinating. No, it's certainly interesting to look at the trends and seeing how this is affecting this might, the trends we're seeing here might also be affecting other or reflected in Wikipedia's coverage of other conflicts. So you've discussed the ways that people have tried to improve Wikipedia by participating in its processes. But it seems like part of the solution, if there is a solution, is to name and shame these biased editors who currently enjoy a kind of anonymity that journalists and editors at more reputable outlets don't have. Are there any efforts being made to create a kind of canary mission that publicly identifies these biased wiki editors and administrators holding up their claims and biases for public scrutiny?
This is actually a very timely question because at the beginning of January, there was an article published in the forward about how the Heritage Foundation, which is a well-known conservative think tank, had pitched to donors apparently about ways to unmask all these pro-Hamas editors on Wikipedia, and like the tactics they were suggesting were like facial recognition and like accessing data breaches of hacked usernames and passwords, something to that effect. And now, for what it's worth, the Heritage Foundation, they declined to comment to the board about this. I have a source in a situation who says that there's no there. It's just all a bunch of smoke. So make of that what you will. But regardless, what happened is that this became a major controversy in Wikipedia. And as a result, the Heritage Foundation is now blacklisted from Wikipedia. What that means is that Heritage's URL is completely blocked from the site altogether. And my understanding is that that's not what the blacklist of Wikipedia is usually used for. It's usually used for like spam sites. That goes to show just how seriously the Wikipedia community takes anonymity. Now, Wikipedia actually encourages its editors to remain anonymous and to take appropriate steps to make sure no one can trace their real life identities. And now, to be clear, not every editor on Wikipedia is anonymous, but many of them are. And so I think when we talk about how influential Wikipedia is and all that, so I have a byline. I have a name, I have a face, my contact information is publicly available. I can be held accountable for what I write. But how can Wikipedia be held accountable? Because the Wikimedia Foundation, which is a nonprofit overseeing Wikipedia, is fully shielded from liability, legally speaking, under Section 230 of the Communication Decency Act. And of course, it's Wikipedia editors. A lot of them are anonymous. And so if you think about it, you have these editors basically shrouded in darkness, dictating our societal discourse. And so I think there's something problematic about that. At the same time, I think a lot of editors remain anonymous because they're afraid of being doxxed and harassed, and I do believe that is as a valid concern. So I think ultimately this is something the Wikipedia community has to discuss amongst themselves, but I don't support any sort of like illicit activities to try and unmask these people.
Yeah, so I mean, for a lot of us who might be thinking, bringing these folks out of the shadows into the light might be part of the solution. But Sounds like it's a lot more. There's a lot. It's a pretty complex issue, and like you said, I
Yeah.
think it involves Wikipedia seems to be at the helm. Particularly Wikimedia Foundation, is that the organization? Can you elaborate a bit more to the people on the webinar what the relationship between Wikipedia and Wikimedia is?
So the Wikimedia Foundation, they're the nonprofit that oversees Wikipedia. I mean, it's really just supposed to like fund Wikipedia and keep the websites operational. But we have seen in recent years that it's like hundreds of millions of dollars on a bunch of like left-wing activism. Like, I mean, it came out not too long ago that they spent like millions of dollars on like DEI initiatives, and they have like they've rewarded like grants to like these various social justice organizations and so forth. So the Wikimedia Foundation does not affect Wikipedia's content, editorially speaking. They'll always say, if you ask them about it, they'll just say, "Oh, we respect consensus" or whatever. But when you see the kind of activism that they've engaged in, I think it does, from an optics standpoint, undermine Wikipedia's neutrality.
Definitely. And so, given the issues you've outlined, do you think that Wikipedia's credibility as a neutral and reliable information source is eroding? What changes, if any, could restore balance to its editorial process?
So, I mean, it's hard to say if it could be like it's hard to say how much this credibility is eroding just because as I said at the beginning of my presentation, like it is always the first, is usually, I should say, the first search on Google. And as long as that's the case, nothing is ever going to really change. I mean, there are certain reforms that could be taken on Wikipedia that could be made. So I think one idea I've heard is that admins should be paid. It seems like you have these volunteer admins that are trying to police the site, when there are bad actors, involved, and that goes about as well as you would, expect it to. And I've also heard a possible suggestion being that like maybe like some of these sources, there should be some sort of like marker as to like where they lean politically, so people know like the source, like what part of nature of the sources that they're reading on Wikipedia. But I really think that in order for there to really be a national conversation on this, there needs to be congressional hearings. I mean, we saw with the universities last year that there wasn't that a change started to happen until the presidents of these universities who were brought before Congress had to explain why they weren't taking anti-Semitism seriously. And so, like, let's see Jimmy Wales go before Congress and have him defend some of this garbage as on Wikipedia articles. And look, I think the political climate right now is perfect for this kind of thing. I mean, Elon Musk, whatever you may think of him, like he's been tweeting out criticism of Wikipedia for a while now. We know he has the president's ear. So, like, I would say that like if there's one takeaway I want people to take from this, it's that let's elevate this to become a national conversation. And it starts right here, like with what we're talking about. Let's make this a topic of national dialogue.
Well, thank you so much, Aaron. Very insightful presentation, and I just have to say, I think even your answers to your questions have educated me, and I'm sure everyone on this webinar on the ins and outs of this issue. And certainly, do you have any last words or advice that you'd like to share before we close out?
Well, I just want to reiterate that how I said in my webinar that Wikipedia can only work when it has enough editors uploaded to the editors who are uploaded to the site's principles. So that's what we should be advocating for. It's for Wikipedia that's truly dedicated to upholding its principles of neutrality. So let's get the conversation going.
Awesome, thank you. Well, that wraps up our program for today. First, a huge thank you to Aaron Bandler for sharing his insights and investigative work. Aaron, your reporting has been eye-opening and truly vital, and we're so grateful for your dedication to exposing the truth. I want to encourage everyone here to go to the Jewish Journal and read Aaron's articles. And thank you to all of you for joining us. We know how frustrating it can be to see platforms like Wikipedia, trusted by millions, allow anti-Israel bias to spread unchecked. That's why Camera is fighting back every day and why your engagement is so important. If today's conversation inspired you, we'd love for you to get involved. One powerful way is by joining Camera's media response team, our network of volunteers who push back against misinformation in the media and on campuses. Some of the most impactful letters to the editor you will see in major newspapers come from our 20,000 strong team. For instance, Our grassroots media response team just helped secure a big correction from Aaron Bandler's local newspaper, the Los Angeles Times, which had mimicked Hamas propaganda by describing the remaining male hostages as Israeli soldiers. In fact, as Camera and our letter writers pointed out, only 13 of the 73 remaining hostages were members of Israel's security forces. That's the kind of fact-based activism that we do in the media world, and you can be a part of this vital effort. Signing up is easy. Just email Sarah Miller at fmiller@camera.org to get started. And if you don't have time to write, another meaningful way to help is by making a donation. Your support allows us to keep fighting these battles on Wikipedia, in the press, on campuses, and beyond. Just visit camera.org and click on the red button to contribute. Every voice, every action, and every donation makes a difference. Thank you again for being with us today. We appreciate your time, passion, and commitment. That concludes our program. Take care, and we'll see you next time.